Hi, this video contains descriptions of self-harm, sexual abuse, and children being put in dangerous situations. Watch at your own discretion. I have started making this video 3 different times, and each time the subject matter changed. The first time was 2 years ago, when I rewatched Sleepover for the first time in decades with my niece, and realized this feels super inappropriate. It reminded me of a sanitized version of Catherine Hardwicke's 13, but made for a much younger audience. The first version of this video was just a comparison piece between those 2 films. 13 and Sleepover are the same movie in different fonts. They both follow preteen girls in a rush to grow up. Girls who want to impress a peer they deem to be far more sophisticated. Both use a mother-daughter dynamic as a catalyst for rebellion, motivating the protagonist to begin the process of separating from being mommy's little girl to becoming her own woman. Both films include the topics of young girls wearing thongs and having sex and being exposed to environments they really should have no part in. They each paint a gruesome portrait of society's treatment toward girls, but only one of them tries to convince the viewer that its portrait illustrates felicity. 13 is the gritty, unflinching look at the cold world of troubled youth. It's a bitter pill. Sleepover is the candy-colored comedy geared towards middle schoolers. It's sugary sweet. And somehow they're both hard to stomach. I was thinking a lot about children in the entertainment industry, a subject that's been on my mind since I was a little girl. See, when I was around 8 years old, I told my mom I wanted to act. There was nothing on this earth I loved more than movies, and the idea of acting in one excited me. Being an introverted homebody, almost grandma-like child, my mom was thrilled that I wanted to do something outside of the house. She signed me up to audition for a talent agency, she bought me a new outfit, she got my hair done, and she drove me to my first audition. I prepared a monologue that I didn't end up having to use because I was given a short script to read from instead. I went into the room. 3 or 4 adults sat behind a long table. I was nervous but determined. I read my lines and put as much of myself as I could into the words that I didn't fully understand. A week or so later, my mom got a call from the agency. They liked me. They wanted to represent me. When my mom got off the phone, I all but attacked her. I wanted to know everything they said. How was my performance? Did it feel real to them? Was I talented? What did they like about me? They said they liked your legs. For the next few years, I became obsessed with my legs. What was it about my legs that made them appealing? What was wrong with me that the most appealing thing about me was the thing that the camera wouldn't even be focusing on? Before I joined the agency, when acting was just a dream, I thought of acting in terms of monologues and comedic timing and reactions, and even though I didn't know the word back then, dramaturgy. But I didn't really think all that much about appearance. I certainly didn't think about my body being appealing in some way. I started thinking of myself not in terms of what I could do, but in terms of how I could look. Much like the monologue I memorized that I didn't have to use, what I could do proved to be rather useless. What seemed to make me valuable was how I looked. Coming to the project with this in mind, the video changed again. This time it was about Sleepover and 13, but also about a bunch of other child actors, and it was about agency and bodily autonomy. I wanted to interrogate the limits to what should be asked of children in filmmaking. I was thinking about children in the industry left beholden to the whims of filmmakers who put their vision above all else. Among these were The Heart is Deceitful Above All Things, Sweet, Sweetback, and Kids. But then it started to lose focus again when I remembered that adults are just as frequently asked to put themselves in danger for the sake of a scene. That video is still coming. Stay tuned for it. Anyway, then I did some more digging about 13. In writing about 13 specifically, I learned a lot about Nikki Reed's experience creating the film, and I kept thinking about my stupid legs. Let me start from the beginning. 13 was started as a sort of therapeutic project for Reed, who was going through a rough time. Divorced parents, splintered friendships, and a barrage of TV messages telling her that beauty was the most valuable currency. Catherine Hardwicke was a friend of the family and thought it would be helpful for Reed to do something creative. They started writing a script about some of Reed's experiences and things she saw her friends going through, and the result, after 6 days, was 13. 13 is one of those movies that I would define as being iconic, but if you haven't heard of it, here's a little rundown. The film begins on the first day of 7th grade. Tracy Freeland is a well-behaved honor student who has a mostly good relationship with her mother. Tracy surrounds herself with friends who have good heads on their shoulders. She does what her mother says, she's kind, and she's well-adjusted. This is a half-truth. Tracy is also struggling with her parents' divorce, with her dad seeming completely uninterested in her life, with her mom still allowing her ex-boyfriend, an addict, into their home and into their lives. Tracy's burgeoning depression goes unnoticed, and she quells these disconcerting feelings by cutting herself and pretending that everything is fine. When Tracy meets Evie Zamora, a fellow 13-year-old, she's awed by her beauty, her confidence, her style, and her complete disregard for authority. From there, the movie sees these two girls as they go on stealing sprees, experiment with drugs, and engage in unprotected sex. The world presented in 13 is brutal. It's a cold world that only gets colder, as evidenced by the cinematography, which starts off with a normal palette, but becomes bluer and grayer as Tracy slips deeper into self-destruction. The story that 13 was co-written by a 13-year-old brought the film an unprecedented amount of attention. When it was screened at Sundance, Fox Searchlight was quick to pick it up, and it didn't take long for the film to take off. Teenagers loved the movie because they could relate to it. Some teens also loved it because they romanticized Tracy and Evie. You can still see that playing out today, with TikTok guides on how to dress like Evie Zamora. Parents were terrified of the film and couldn't believe that kids so young could be exposed to such things so quickly. Naturally, it incurred some controversy, but for the most part, it was rightfully extolled and even used as an after-school special to a degree. I mean, there were even dare pamphlets handed out at a screening in New York. The movie was used to start a conversation between parents and children about their lives, their worries, and peer pressure. For some, it was entertainment, but for others, it was a warning. And for everyone, it was an authentic look at the troubled lives of teen girls. 13 served somewhat as a tool, used to excavate the hidden truths of American adolescence, and for Hardwick, used to help a troubled kid find a release. But it could be and was doubled as a weapon aimed at the very girls it was intended to protect. The film is a moving and necessary work of art that's packed with magnetic performances. Even just editing this video, I would go into the film to pull a short clip and end up watching an entire scene play out.
Oh no. Get off of me. I hate you. Stop. I love you and your brother more than anything in the world. And I'll die for you, but I won't leave you alone right now.
Because it's the kind of film that just grabs you. Unfortunately, to no fault of its own, it's also the kind of film that gets oversimplified, misread, and used as a means of classification. See, its stars Evan Rachel Wood and Nikki Reed became synonymous with the characters they played and were pigeonholed into this nymphette archetype for a time. There's nothing morally repugnant about being typecast. It's annoying, but it's not reprehensible. It's just the industry. But Wood and Reed's typecastings were different. They were particularly unsettling because they were both so young, and because the roles they were being typecast from weren't these one-dimensional hypersexual characters. They were being typecast from roles that were nuanced, challenging, and emotionally devastating. Tracy and Evie are complex characters. Tracy pretends to be fine for so long that she eventually explodes, but even when she's doing drugs or screaming at her mom, she's a sensitive child who just wants to be happy. Evie presents herself as more sophisticated and in control.
I'm not in that class. I'm taking advanced physics, Mo.
That was a lie.
She manipulates people to get what she wants, but there's truth and vulnerability woven into her lies. At the end of the movie, when Mel drops Evie off at her aunt's house to stay for good, Evie is genuinely heartbroken. We see these girls being sexualized, but they aren't sexualized by the film. This is a tightrope to walk, but Hardwick pulls it off, able to expose how these girls learn to be sexual at a young age, but managing to do so without also becoming another vehicle of hypersexualization. We only see two girls who are going down a dangerous path, clinging for control and grabbing nothing but air. Somehow, these two complex characters were flattened into nymphets and girls gone wild. And this is why I thought about my stupid legs. In the aftermath of 13's success, many things happened. It started a conversation between parents and children. It was nominated for Golden Globes, BAFTAs, and an Academy Award. And it gave its child stars a reputation. Because this was so often pushed as being Reed's real-life story, to the point that in an interview with The View, Reed had to draw a line and clarify that it was not autobiographical.
Now, this is based on your life. When did all of that stuff start happening for you?
Well, first of all, the film is not autobiographical. Okay. It's loosely based on things I went through, but also things that a lot of my friends went through and things I observed.
People looked at her like she was a temptress who knew better than she let on. In that same interview, Reed says that part of the reason she was exposed to such extreme things at such a young age was because she looked a lot older than she was.
And I was definitely young when I went through a lot of those things, but I think it has to do with that I look older.
So you say a lot of the things you went through were because you looked older?
Yeah, when I looked the same age that I do now. Like I looked
now.
when I was 13, I looked how I look now, which I don't think I look 13 right now. I
So
don't
you
know.
mean boys like came on to you more?
Yeah, older
or you
men.
But you must have gotten a lot of response to the way you look, so that maybe encouraged you to keep wearing the clothes the way you did and your hair and the makeup, right?
It's a small moment that characterizes a recurring theme. Girls are told by songs, television, and leering adults to be sexual, but when they respond to those demands, the responsibility lies with them and them alone. The way Reed and Wood were perceived by the industry made their young ages irrelevant. Even though I have a strong appreciation for 13, really, I think it's one of the best coming-of-age movies of all time. There's something about it that's always made my skin crawl. Not just me. In the documentary Phoenix Rising, an examination of how the justice system handles cases of abuse, particularly with recantations and expired statutes, actress Evan Rachel Wood details her relationship with her abuser, Brian Warner, also known as Marilyn Manson. Wood talks about her childhood, her time in the industry, and she sheds light on 13. Particularly the scene that she looks back on with a twisted stomach. Here's the setup. Tracy and Evie visit an older neighbor, Luke. Things start off simple enough, but then Evie convinces Tracy to kiss Luke. Uncomfortable but determined, Tracy does so. The scene reaches its dramatic peak when both Tracy and Evie straddle Luke and make out with him. Why is this so unnerving? Well, I did say child stars, right? Nikki Reed was 14 at the time of filming, Evan Rachel Wood had just turned 15, and Kit Pardue was, depending on the exact time this scene was filmed, either 27 or 28. And the documentary Wood recalls feeling uncomfortable with this scene, but pushing through because she needed to.
I grew up with this mentality that it was your job to keep going, even when you felt uncomfortable. Even 13, I had to make out with a 23-year-old when I was 14 in front of a room full of people. And I remember not wanting to do it. But I knew that the character needed to, and so it didn't matter what Evan wanted. It just had to be done.
For the most part, Wood looks back on her time making 13 with fondness, but this scene is hard to look at. Shortly after 13, Nikki Reed was offered the role of Minnie in the film Minnie's First Time, which follows a conniving teenager who seduces her stepfather, convinces him to kill her mother, and gets off scot-free, able to inherit her mother's fortune. The camera leers on Reed's body, whether she's in a bikini or lingerie, and all this while Reed was 17. In Phoenix Rising, Evan Rachel Wood refers to this as the machine.
Well, that's when I got branded the troubled teen. This is who you go to if you want the troubled teen, which very quickly evolved into the little Lolita.
In Stanley Kubrick's Lolita, Sue Lyon was cast to play the titular character. Lolita is famously a 12-year-old girl at the start of Vladimir Nabokov's controversial and acclaimed novel. For the film adaptation, she was aged up a few years, both to circumvent the strict rulings dictated by the infamous Hays Code and to make the relationship between Humbert and Lolita, and I'm quoting here, less perverse. Never mind that Humbert is still a middle-aged man and the aged-up Lolita is still just 14. Their age gap could be and often was defended on the basis of Sue Lyon's appearance. She looked a little older than 14, but she was still only 14. To be 14 and to be surrounded by much older men who are insistent on your being in the film, insistent on your being a sex pot, insistent that your presence makes Humbert's interest in a child less sinister and therefore safer to sympathize with, is an unfathomable amount to come to terms with. The role famously had a negative impact on Lyon, and she would look back on Lolita with disgust and confusion. While making Lolita, Lyon was embroiled in a sexual relationship with producer James B. Harris, a man 18 years her senior. Even though their relationship was rumored in 1962, the speculation never painted Harris out as being predatory. It only pointed toward Lyon as being a young woman who was mature enough to be suited by an older man, and in one article, Lyon herself is suggested to be the one who pursues older men. Her age is 16, according to her studio, and he's an old man of 33. She prefers the company of mature men, and James may be just her cup of tea. After all, she played Lolita, and Lolita, according to the film's producers and quite a few literary critics at the time of the book's release, was a seductress. She was manipulative. She was actually the villain of the story. In a very old video of mine about how misreadings of Lolita brought us the nymphette femme fatale, I quote one of the literary critics whose perspective on misreadings of the book and movie sum up the kind of environment that Lion was coming of age in. In his essay, Lolita Solipsized or Sodomized, Peter J. Rabinowitz investigates how and why Lolita, undeniably a victim of Humbert's predatory ways, has been so widely misread as corrupt. Lolita is often figured in the popular imagination as a temptress, and even critics who have actually read the book, and should therefore know better, describe her in similarly distorted ways. John Hollander, in his famous early review of the novel, claims that on their first night together, Lolita turns out to be completely corrupt, and he goes on to refer to the pair as the lovers, and to the relationship that follows as their affair. Trilling refers to a Lolita who is not innocent and who seems to have very few emotions to be violated. And Richard Schickel, who believes Lolita to be that most repugnant of all females, describes Humbert as follows. Humbert, absurdly sensitive, catering ridiculously to the whims of a child, is a pathetic, almost tragic figure. How is it that the novel has been read in this way? I would argue that the novel does not ask for such an anti-Lolita perspective, and that the problem stems from the readers, not from the text. So there are two Lolitas, and I'd be remiss not to make it clear that when Evan Rachel Wood says she was viewed as a little Lolita, she isn't talking about the 12-year-old girl groomed and preyed upon by her stepfather. She's talking about what Lolita became in the hands of people unable or unwilling to view Humbert as the bad guy. She's talking about the inaccurate archetype that Lolita would become, one of a precocious and promiscuous little girl. And Wood is right. The industry did churn out this image of her as the second of the two Lolitas, and the machine ran with it.
And that's when the machine came in, the industry machine, and saw this image of maturity and ran with it. But I was still so young.
After Wood's relationship with Manson was revealed to the public, she was called a whore, a homewrecker, while the man twice her age came out entirely unscathed. Wood may have been young, the machine said, but she knew what she was doing. She was the troubled teen, she was the girl gone wild, and she was responsible. Manson would write a song about Wood called Heart-Shaped Glasses, where he repeatedly calls her a little girl. Allegedly, one of the first things Manson said to Wood upon first meeting her was, "I loved you in 13.
So he starts talking about the film I did called 13, saying, I'm a big fan, I love your work.
Much like Lolita, Evie and Tracy had their complex and nuanced dimensions warped and flattened into hypersexual beings with malicious intent. And much like with Sue Lyon, the roles followed Wood and Reed, giving them reputations that they almost couldn't escape.
She used to spank me. She spanked me so hard that it hurt.
I was offered a string of mature roles.
This goes a little farther than simply being typecast. Even the most artfully done films with the best of intentions can do a fair bit of harm. Whether that's down to some of the treatment Reed and Wood experienced in the aftermath of the film, where their characters were conflated with their identities, or in the exposure that came with the scene where they make out with an older actor. Alongside these dizzying cycles and parallels where life and art take turns imitating one another, there's the element of exploitation. Al Rose, a New Orleans-based historian, researched the history of the city's red light district and eventually published a book about it. The book described historical laws and included first-hand accounts from women who grew up in the brothels of Storyville. One of the interviewees was a woman who chose anonymity, but offered the pseudonym Violet as she detailed her story. She describes growing up and seeing sex all the time. She was 10 years old when she started to participate. This is the book that became the inspiration for director Louis Malle, and it would lead to the 1978 film that has been marred in controversy since its release and has stayed circulating in discourse about protecting child stars, for decades. Pretty Baby. The film famously centers on Violet, a 12-year-old girl growing up in a brothel who is forced into prostitution by her own mother. The film combines a lot of the real stories recounted in Rose's book. This is the role that first embroiled Brooke Shields, then 12 years old, in controversy regarding the film's moral turpitude. It wasn't just that Shields was playing a child prostitute, it was that she had multiple topless scenes and a kissing scene with Keith Carradine, who was 28 years old. People were split. Some people thought it was a haunting exploration of a dark subject, and others thought it was counterintuitive, because although it aimed to be a film delineating horrific exploitation of a child, it did so by exploiting a child. A lot of the criticism was lauded, naturally, at all of the adults involved with the film. The director Louis Malle, Shields' mother and manager Terry, actress Susan Sarandon, and actor Keith Carradine. But surprising no one, Brooke Shields also got a fair bit of heat. Why would you, people would ask her, take a role like that? What are you trying to tell the world? You must not be as innocent as you look. In 1981, Shields would fall under these same criticisms when she and her mother went to court against Playboy photographer Gary Gross. Gross had taken nude pictures of Shields with her mother's permission when she was only 9 years old. They had gone to court over the rights of the photos, which Terry Shields had signed away years earlier. This trial would go on for 2 more years, and Shields was eviscerated in the media and in the courts for posing for these photographs. What should have been a simple case about rights became an opportunity for men to grill Shields on her sexuality, trying to spin and place the blame on her for having posed in the first place. Suggests that Shields has made a career out of being a Lolita. At the time of these court dates, Shields was 16, being made to answer for something she was told to do at 9 years old. In the 2023 documentary film, Pretty Baby, Brooke Shields, Shields remembers the way she was interrogated.
I was on the stand for 2 days straight. It was so hurtful to me. My public image is what was actually on trial.
Between 13, Lolita, Pretty Baby, and countless other movies, there's a recurring theme of innocence. Who gets to be seen as innocent? What makes someone, particularly a young woman, not innocent? And does innocence determine who should be protected and who shouldn't? During these court dates, Shields was accused of wanting to be a sex symbol at 9 years old, and his argument was used to justify the pictures being released to the public. You took the pictures, so you wanted them out there, so he's allowed to put them out there.
The prosecuting attorney, who was just such a prick, was like making lewd gestures to me, and nobody was seeing it, and
what do you mean, lewd gestures?
Like he would lick his lips and look at me and say things like, "You were thinking of fornication, weren't you?"
Sue Lyon was cast in large part due to her appearance as being a bit older than 14. Looking just slightly older made it so she could be framed in a certain way, in a more culpable way. Even though Nikki Reed co-wrote 13 based on her own experiences, she was told she wasn't right for the role of Tracy. In an interview with Monica Corcoran for the New York Times in 2003, Reed said the reason she wasn't cast as Tracy was because they didn't think she looked innocent enough. As details emerged of the abuse Wood experienced at the hands of Manson, his fans would viciously attack her online. Some of them would claim that she couldn't have been a victim because she wasn't innocent. See, she had experience and a reputation, one created by a fictional role, mind you, so how could he have done anything wrong? Even in the book created by historian Al Rose, there is an excerpt of a newspaper article he found from the previous century. A journalist was interviewing a brothel owner about the underage girl in her employ. "Well, is procuring girls for keepers of places of ill fame a regular business followed by you? And if so, why do you send innocent girls into such a sphere of unholiness?" asked the reporter. "I do not, sir, have anything to do with innocent girls," replied Mrs. Herrick. I have lots to say about the Bernardo Bertolucci film The Last Tango in Paris. Most of it will appear in that video about ethics, but I want to touch on it briefly here as well. On the set of that film, Maria Schneider was surprised by a rape scene that had suddenly been added to the script. In a 2007 interview, Schneider said that she felt violated by Bertolucci and even Brando because neither of them told her beforehand about what they planned to do for the scene. Years later, Bertolucci would go on to say that while he feels some guilt regarding how the scene was handled, he didn't regret it. In a separate interview he gave in 2011, he stated, "I remember when we opened Last Tango in Paris in New York. She had a page in the New York Times where she was saying, 'I slept with 74 men and 55 women.' Really talking in a wild way. But then time passes and she starts to complain and to let me know through interviews that I stole her youth. The subtext is clear. She's talking like she's innocent, he seems to want to say. But she's not. She wasn't. So I didn't do anything wrong." This video does not present a full picture, but merely a symptom of a sickness that is too complicated and too ubiquitous to explain or eradicate. And although this did not start with Lolita, first published in 1955, tracing these instances back to the moment when Lolita became synonymous with complicity and seduction offers a little insight into the kind of monster we're dealing with. In the end, the machine will do what it always does.